Major Spielman, you were a former IDF spokesman. I've been exchanging quite lively posts on X with various Israeli ministers and indeed other commentators, specifically about what has been going on with these very large crowds of very animated Palestinians who've been lining up for the very meager amounts of food that are available to them. And I just thought it would be constructive, before I ask you about that, just to go through quickly how many incidents there have been since the end of May, specific to these lines of people who are queuing up for food, where there have been people who've been shot dead, and what the IDF said about them. So 28th of May, 1 was killed, 48 wounded. This is according to the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry. The UN said that most of injuries were down to Israeli forces. The IDF said it fired warning.
On Piers Morgan Uncensored, the heat is on as Major Doron Spielman, former IDF spokesman, faces cutting questions about Palestinian deaths in Gaza, specifically civilians shot while lining up for food. This segment exposes raw tension over Israel's war tactics, conflicting narratives, and the humanitarian crisis. With searing accusations and denials flying, is peace anywhere near? Let's break this down.
Shots, but not towards people. 1st of June, 31 killed, 200 injured. Again, the health ministry figures. Doctors said around 200 people arrived at hospital with gunshot and shrapnel wounds. The IDF called the reports false. 3rd of June, 27 killed, 37 wounded. Hospital director says 37 people arrived at a local hospital with gunshot wounds. IDF said troops fired at suspects, quotes, deviating from designated access routes. 7th of June, 6 killed, several wounded. The Civil Defense Agency said that there were 6 Palestinians.
This quote highlights the disturbing pattern of civilian casualties and institutional denial, exposing the systemic deflection by Israeli forces amid a growing humanitarian disaster.
Killed by Israeli gunfire near an aid center. The Israeli military says it fired warning shots at suspects who approached them in a threatening manner. 8th of June, 4 killed. Again, the IDF said it fired warning shots at a group it deemed to be a threat. 9th of June, 6 killed, 99 injured. IDF said it was looking into the reports. 11th of June, 57 killed, 200 plus injured. The IDF said it's looking into these reports. 14th of June, 15 killed. IDF said they fired warning shots at a group they believe posed a potential threat. 15th of June, 26 killed, 117 injured. IDF said it wasn't aware of gunshots at one site and is looking into events at another. 16th of June, 30 plus killed. IDF said troops fired warning shots at suspects approaching them and posing a threat. 17th of June, 51 killed. The IDF said it's looking into the reports. 18th of June, 11 killed. IDF said troops fired warning shots after a group approached them in a way that posed a potential threat. The 19th of June, at least 12 killed, 60 injured. IDF said suspects had attempted to approach forces and soldiers had fired warning shots. 20th of June, 23 killed, 100 injured. IDF said troops fired warning shots after people gathered nearby. An Israeli aircraft then struck several suspects who continued walking towards troops. 21st of June, 8 killed. IDF said it's looking into the incidents. 24th of June, at least 44 killed, dozens injured. IDF says it will review details of the reports. Total number of deaths listed above 352. The UN says the number is actually higher at 410, but you can see the pattern there. And the reason I read them all out so specifically, Major Spielman, is you can see a pattern there where an incredibly large number of civilians are getting killed in these lines of people queuing up for food. And in every case, the IDF either says they fired warning shots, but don't take any accountability for hitting anybody or killing or wounding anybody, or they say we're looking into the reports, and then, strangely, we never get any further information. And at the same time, as I keep going on about, the IDF won't allow international journalists into Gaza at all unless it's in tightly controlled, very brief periods under their very tight control. So you put it all together, and pertaining to what Gideon Levy just said, there has been a series of appalling things happening while we've had our focus taken to what's going on with Iran. And I'm just not buying this argument from Israeli ministers that somehow None of this has anything to do with the IDF. Are you?
Pierce, I think once again we're going back to the situation in Gaza, which we know there's one problem in Gaza, and that problem would solve all of this, beyond all the numbers. The problem is very simply what started this entire mess, which is Hamas. We know that Hamas, as we've discussed numerous times, is hiding behind these civilians. We know because Gazans have been posting on it, including the Shireen family. Gazans are filling Facebook, trying to get the word out to us that they have reported that 5 members of their family, Osama Shaheen, again and again, people are being killed by Hamas on their way to those food distribution points for one simple reason. Hamas wants to control the food in Gaza, and anyone that takes that food is possibly complicit, according to them, in partnering with the Israeli army. It's their voices we need to listen to. Regarding these numbers, I've looked online, the IDF has looked online. AP quotes the New York Times, that quotes the AP, that quotes somebody else. There's not a single picture, not a single video, not a single ratified source. The IDF is not out there just shooting randomly at people. We are trying to protect the health workers that are handing out the food, which, by the way, have given out 40 million meals over the last few weeks. But the problem here is essential. The problem is Hamas, as long as they are in Gaza, this is going to continue because they use humans as shields. The moment they leave Gaza, then this is all over. It's what we've been saying since the very beginning, Pierce.
Right, but just to be clear,
A staggering denial of responsibility despite overwhelming evidence sparks outrage and deepens distrust, exposing an unbridgeable gulf between official statements and on-the-ground reality.
of all of those incidents I laid out in detail, is your position really that the IDF didn't kill anybody?
Again, I'm not at every single incident. I would assume if the IDF killed somebody or if we targeted somebody, we try to release that information as best we can to the press. There's probably never been an army in the most difficult situation of urban fighting, Pierce,
Major Steele,
in the entire world. I'm sorry, that's had to face this before.
With great respect, you and I both know that's complete claptrap. The IDF will do whatever it can not to admit that it's killing civilians. It constantly deflects. It constantly blames Hamas for all the deaths. And yet we have doctors, independent British doctors, who have been treating the victims, who all have been saying that actually most of these deaths and injuries have been caused by IDF. IDF admit they keep firing bullets. Either they're the worst shots in the world, or we're supposed to believe they're firing them all straight up in the air, or they are shooting at groups of people, perhaps believing they include Hamas, and they're killing people on a daily basis, it seems, and they're killing a lot of people. And I just think this idea that the IDF can just constantly obfuscate and just say we're launching a review, which then never comes to anything, or we just shot bullets in the air and all these people fell over and had to be treated or died. It's for the birds. People are just not believing it anymore. And the reason I don't believe it is that the very simple way to verify it is to let the journalists in from outside into Gaza, and the IDF persistently refuses, at Netanyahu's instruction, to let any journalists in. So there's no way to independently verify this. We're then reliant on Palestinian journalists, many of whom have been killed, nearly 200 now, or we're reliant on doctors who paint a very different story to the one you've just painted. But at what point are you going to let journalists in? I'm not saying you personally, but at what point is the Israeli government going to let journalists in so that these things can be properly verified?
Pierce, I'm sorry. The numbers, I disagree with you completely on much of what you're saying. The numbers are coming, as you and I both know, from the Gaza Health Ministry. They say numbers, 5,000 were killed, and everybody writes down 5,000 were killed. And then they reverse their own numbers like they did between March 5th and March 7th, 2024. You and I both know that the numbers of children who they reported were killed on March 5th were 14,500. 2 days later, those numbers went down to 7,500, meaning 7,000
how many children have been killed
that they claimed were killed came back to life.
How many children have been killed?
They are in Gaza, and they are reporting these deaths, and they are changing their own numbers.
But two things.
They've been saying for years that most of the people have been killed. If I could just finish one quick thing, Pierce. Can I just say one quick thing? That we know from this year, just a couple months ago in March of this year, 2025, all of a sudden Hamas erased names off their list, which when you take those names into account, it shows 72% of the people that have been killed in Gaza are 13 to 54-year-old Muslims that are militant age in Gaza. This is a completely different picture that they've been presenting. And we know, unfortunately, 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds in Gaza are given an AK-47 and sent into the battlefield.
Okay, two things I want to say.
Here is completely
All right, two
corrupt.
things I would point out.
Of course, people have died. That's why we don't want war. We don't want war.
I would point out several things because I saw Gideon there shaking his head, and I will come to you, Gideon, for a response. But first of all, you did let journalists into Gaza in previous flare-ups in Gaza without any problem. So it's inexplicable that you won't let them in now. Secondly, the Palestinian Health Authority, Hamas-run, has historically revealed figures which have later turned out, verified by Israel, to be broadly correct. So you can dismiss all their numbers as being nonsense, but actually the truth is, historically, when they have said casualty numbers, they have largely turned out, and I'm not talking about this war, I'm talking about historically in the last 2 decades, they've turned out largely to be accurate, verified by the Israeli side too. So this idea of just making them all up is not true. But let me come to Gideon, because you were wanting to jump in there, Gideon. My problem with this is that the IDF can basically just say whatever they want to dismiss any suggestion they've behaved improperly, and there's no way to disprove it because the journalists aren't allowed in there.
No, there are so many ways to disprove it because there are so many videos coming out of Gaza and very brave journalists who are still alive, who were not killed by the Israeli soldiers, still report, and you see the picture. First of all, I must remind ourselves that when the UN's agencies distributed the aid, there were no killed people. It all started with this monster organization of putting 2-3 stations in the Gaza Strip for 2 million people, almost as an experiment in human being, in starving human beings. And then comes the question really about the figures. Oh, those propaganda people, they love to speak about figures. Aren't they 1,000 babies less than 1 year killed? No, they know it's only 700 babies killed. Hamas is exaggerating. And if it is 700 babies killed, can we live with it? None of them was killed in purpose, all of them by chance, all of them potential threat to the soldiers. How dare you to spread this propaganda knowing that you are lying? There is a daily massacre in Gaza now. Killing in the sake of killing, nothing but this. The last 2 weeks are horrible because you see the soldiers, you hear the machine guns, you see the people lying on the sand and trying to save themselves. How can you dare to invent all kinds of statistics instead of saying, yes, this is our army, the army got a command now.
This chilling admission of intent marks an escalation from denial to unapologetic justification of mass civilian deaths, challenging any claims of a moral war and raising alarms of potential war crimes.
To kill as many Palestinians as possible because that's our goal now. We don't have any other goal in Gaza now.
Natalie.
Pierce, can I respond to him? Okay.
Let me go to Natalie first, then I'll come back to you. Natalie, this seems to me, this is why this is such a complex story generally, because I broadly agreed with Israel and its strikes on Iran. I agreed completely with the Hezbollah attacks using the pages. I thought it was a brilliantly sophisticated operation against a bunch of terrorists who've been attacking Israel for years. There are lots of things that Israel has been doing which I have no problem with. But this situation in Gaza is being conducted in a completely different manner. There's nothing surgical about it, nothing precise. It just seems to be an intent to demolish Gaza, to drive, according to the finance minister Smotrich, on the record, to cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. In other words, get them out. That is ethnic cleansing. That would be a war crime if that happens. It just seems to me that Israel, this big picture of the Israel-Palestine conflict, if Israel genuinely wants to forge relations with Saudi Arabia like it's done with other nations in the Middle East, it's never going to happen until they sort out what is happening in Gaza. And I don't understand the strategy. The hostages aren't being released. More and more civilians are being killed, making more and more people hate the Israeli government, and therefore, unfortunately, Israeli people get dragged into what their government's doing on their behalf. It makes the world dangerous for Israelis, for Jews. I just don't see what they're doing there, which is making any real sense. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think through the fog of war, with what you're seeing going on in Gaza, I think we're already seeing the ramifications here in the United States. I think people certainly remember the really radical Hamas protests that we saw across college campuses, the people who were perhaps rightfully upset about what was going on in Gaza. I think you've seen really the rhetoric. I think the universities, they've really become the new flashpoint for that. But I think what it goes back to, right, when you talk about the MAGA movement, sort of their reorientation of global affairs, I'm not saying I don't care about what's going on in Gaza. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I think it's about priorities. And certainly there's a sect of Americans who are really, really animated about that issue. But I think Americans care more about the American lives being lost, whether it's because of fentanyl, the open border, frankly, the Hamas proxies, the Iranian proxies that are going on here. And most importantly, I think the potential for a mass refugee conflict, not just into Europe, but into the United States. So I obviously have empathy and compassion. And I think that to some extent, those numbers probably are accurate. It's also war. If you invade a country, sorry, it's also sort of what's going to happen. I don't think the United States should be involved at the rate at which we're at. But my primary concern as an American is that I don't want to see really what will become a snowballing number of refugees end up in the West or the United States.
Okay, let's just bring in another guest briefly and speak to the author and political commentator, Trita Parsi. Mr. Parsi, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you so much.
There are mixed reports about just how much damage.
This explosive segment lays bare the clash between conflicting narratives about Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe and Israel's military tactics. With mounting evidence of civilian deaths denied by official channels and accusations of ethnic cleansing reverberating, the conversation captures the profound stakes and moral dilemmas of modern asymmetrical warfare. The voices here challenge viewers to demand truth, accountability, and urgent solutions. But are they still possible? Drop your take below and stand witness to this critical human crisis unfolding live.